writers, and everyone in between. I'm your host, Lauren Moore, and today we are hanging out with Cary G. Osborne, the author of a thrilling short story in our new space opera anthology. That short story is Threat. It is about one woman's fight for survival in space. And we have the author here with us today. So Cary, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
It is really wonderful to meet you. And this is your Oklahoma Writer's Den?
Yes, it is.
What
Lots
do
of
you have?
books.
Lots of books, and I see some other things on the shelves. Do you have inspiration in your room, in your writer's den?
Sometimes, yeah. A lot of teddy bears too, which is, kind of calms the whole writing thing. So,
Yeah, I find that I've got my couple of pictures on the wall, and mostly I'm just trying to get into the zone. So, however it works for you as an author, to kind of get into your writing zone, that's what you got to do.
that's true. I don't actually write in here a
Okay.
lot of the time, so it's more of a research room in a lot of ways.
All right. Well, today we're just going to get to know you as a writer and give the readers a chance to meet you, to meet the real Cary, to hear about your life and your inspiration and your work. So go ahead, tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing and what inspires you to write.
Well, I've been a reader all of my life, and I've read just about every type of book, short story, and so on. I've just eat it all up. Although I'm dyslexic, it takes me a while to get through any kind of book. And which always bothered me since I read so much. Why am I so slow? I just loved science fiction starting at about 12. So I started writing that first when I'd finally decided. I'm not one of those writers who's been writing all of her life.
Mm-hmm.
I really started writing probably in my late 30s and writing seriously, going to writers groups and writers classes and things like that to learn the craft. You think you know it when you read a lot, you know
Right.
exactly how a book comes together, but it is not that easy.
Yeah, I find, like, I'm a huge reader, and I thought that writing was such a high mountain, such a tall task, that I didn't even start. I didn't even try until recently. But did you find that to be true? What was that part of why you wrote a little bit later? Was you just kind of so intimidated by it, or was there another piece to the puzzle?
I played around with it for a little while, but I never took my writing seriously, that I would be a writer someday. It just never really occurred to me that was going to happen. I started a novel when I was in high school. It was a Western.
Huh.
And I didn't think I knew enough science to do science fiction. I didn't think I knew enough about this to do mysteries or whatever. I never felt that I was qualified to be a writer. I never really thought about it that much. There were other things I thought I wanted to be when I grew up. So
What did you end up doing?
I have done everything. My last position that I retired from, I was an archivist. I was processing political papers in New Mexico.
Okay. Does that help you with your writing, that you've tried so many different things and met different people and been to different places? Does that help inform your writing?
In a way, in one respect, but it's also, it was talking to a writer who's lived in the same place all of his life. So he knows the area, he knows the people, and he writes about them. So it's so imbued in him, this milieu, that he knows it so well, and he writes about it beautifully. Whereas I'm not that much into a specific thing. I'm so much a generalist that sometimes it's hard to focus in on certain types of things. I guess that's one reason I write so many different genres.
Yeah, you have the Sydney St. John Mysteries, the Deathweave Series, and the Iroshi Trilogy.
Right.
What kind of stories are you inspired and excited by?
And a little bit of everything. I started out writing and reading a lot of short stories. I think they're kind of out of favor now. With this anthology, hopefully that will help them come back. When I first started writing, I was under the impression to be a novelist, you had to make a name for yourself as a short story writer first. So I was very much into short stories and all of that. There are certain authors I wish I was. I wish I had written that book, so to speak, or things like that. But sometimes I lose my own voice because I get so much into something else and I have to back off.
Which authors really draw you to them?
Right now,
Yeah.
Louise Penny in Mysteries. I think she's absolutely wonderful. Nina George, who has written 2 books, The Little Paris Bookshop and The Little French Bistro, I think it is. They all take place in France, and they're absolutely wonderful, but they're not genre fiction. And then John Scalzi in science fiction, several different people, Beth Massey in horror. Like I say, I write and read everything. Most of my short stories are horror. So I've read
Ooh.
quite a bit of that.
And then with those authors, they all have a strong voice, but you said sometimes it can be hard to find your own voice as an author. How does an author find her own voice and develop that, or his own voice?
I think probably practice by just doing it all of the time, and sometimes even talking. I go to conventions and talking to other authors and about how they write, how I write, discussing different things, and you get so immersed in conversation and everything. It just kind of starts to gel for you. I come home from these conventions just wired, wanting to get to the writing immediately, and it just makes a difference to be around other writers.
So be around other writers, meet them, meet their inspiration. And it's encouraging, it's inspiring, and it gives you fuel to write your own stuff.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can you
It's
think of any? Oh,
it's sort of like getting permission to write my own,
yeah,
if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah. Your story Threat has a really strong female character at the start, and I don't want to give any spoilers away, but I have to say it was pretty early on that I wondered if you're going to pull a Game of Thrones kind of ending. I wasn't sure if the protagonist was going to make it, and I'm not going to say no spoilers on this show. I'm not going to.
Right.
But I liked how you built in that tension pretty early on. This character might not make it, and that might actually make the ending, kind of fascinating to see where this is going to go, how it's going to end up.
Well, I always do strong female characters. Iroshi was a warrior, a kendoka. Um, and in the Deathweave series, the main character and a few others are warriors. I just like the strong female character. And this one, I thought, now I haven't read Game of Thrones or even seen the films or anything, so I don't know how they go. And I wanted something, well, it wasn't like a conscious decision. It was like it just developed in this particular story, how it came out. And I know my writers group was pretty surprised.
Does your horror background and horror interest kind of play into the short story Threat and the idea that the protagonist might not make it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely.
So with horror, the protagonist often doesn't make it. Is that a thing?
Yeah, in horror, quite often it doesn't have a happy ending, or it'll have an ambiguous ending. Or I wrote one about a spider story, which was in the anthology Pick Your Poison. And it ends pretty ambiguously as to whether or not this whole family is going to survive. But they're very strong, and you feel like, at the end, I think you feel like they probably will, but it's going to be a struggle.
What draws people to stories like that, where the ending is uncertain and the fate of the main character is uncertain?
Because life is, I think, we
Yeah.
never know from one day to the next what's going to happen. And the whole idea, in some ways, is you can end it yourself. You can decide how it's going to go after you've read the story. And say, well, this is what's going to happen. This is how they're going to handle it.
So as a reader, you like to kind of predict what's going to come down the pike and see if your predictions are right or no?
As a reader, I prefer solid endings.
Yeah,
It's kind of funny, but yeah, I want to know what the writer saw as far as how it was all going to turn out. And that's odd that I like that when my reading, but in my writing, I do like ambiguous endings. It's kind of fun.
that's part of the payoff for you, is to kind of to look at the characters and to look at the storyline and to predict what might be after the story's all over. The story.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's the same with Ciola in Threat. In the end, you really don't know where it's going to go. You know, even though there is an ending, it still
Yeah.
isn't that cut and dried.
Oh, that brings up another question. Are you going to write outside of the short story with the same characters? Are you anticipating writing a novel or a series that involves the same plot, just kind of further?
The idea has come to me. Yeah, I've got at one point I had 6 novels going, and that many different pieces. It's like, you know, an idea comes to you, and oh, I've got to write it. This is so good, and you get into it, and then you realize you got 5 other stories going on. And so with this particular one, I would like to. I think she's an interesting character. I think there's an interesting possibility left at the end. I think it would be a lot of fun to do, but I've just got so many other things going right now that I'm not really considering it seriously.
Yeah, that once you get the door to ideas open, all these characters keep walking through, and then keep walking through, and you either write them or you don't. But that get that door open, and then write, keep going.
Well, I was in a radio interview one time many years ago, and they were it was at another convention, and there were a lot of women science fiction writers there. And the radio station came in with all their equipment, and they lined us all up and asked us all these questions. And the last question was, where do you get your ideas? And I was the last one that they got to, and everybody else gave really serious, sensible answers. And got to me, and I told them, well, I live in Norman, Oklahoma, and down on Campus Corner, there's this little store that sometimes has 10 story ideas for $1. And I go down there and buy up a bunch of them, so I'll have them for later.
What'd they say? What'd they do?
They laughed at it, and you know, the funny part though is several years later, I actually came across a picture of a store that had the title was Ideas. The name of the store was Ideas, and they sold. I don't know what they sold. It was like in the 1890s, 1900s, and I still have that picture. I think it's absolutely wonderful.
That's cute. So a shop back in the 1800s that sold ideas?
Yeah, an idea store, and I have no idea, like I say, what they actually sold. You can't tell from the picture really strongly what it is that they actually sold, but it was really pretty cool.
Well, we've got a live chat today, and we had someone, Luke noted, it's Friday the 13th, and she's a horror writer. Classic.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And we had a number of fans of horror pop up on the chat. Dean Floyd says, I love a good horror short story. Actually, that's a good point. The horror genre works really well for short story. You know,
it does.
Think of Edgar Allan Poe. You know, he's the daddy of the short story. He helped to kind of, he was kind of a pioneer of the short story to figure out what it was and what drives it.
Right.
Poe fan?
Yes, I've read Poe, and there are several more modern ones. Charles Grant is a real great horror writer. Did a lot of short stories. Joe Lansdale's written a few. Trying to think. I've been to some horror conventions, and it's really interesting to get a bunch of horror writers together.
Yeah, if they play Dungeons and Dragons together, that must be an interesting time.
Well, I haven't seen that, but yeah, it would be interesting.
And then we had a number of comments about voice. Bard Stave says, voice was always a nebulous concept to me. Dean says, voice seems to be tied to tone, verb choice, and the types of tropes your characters manifest. And that he's still finding his. Yeah, I think, is that something that authors keep on working on, figuring out what their voice is? Or do you think you'll ever kind of make it and then you'll just know who you are as an author?
I don't think you always know who you are as an author. I think it often changes because you grow, you change, things that interest you change. One of my things is I have always spoken very good English, and I've had some people criticize my writing because it's rather, forgotten the word they use, but something like scholarly.
Oh,
because I don't use a lot of slang and
yeah.
idiom and that sort of thing. So it's one of the things that I have tried to do less of, but it's part of my voice. The word choice is my language and all of that. So I'm still trying to work on that a little bit. Depends on sometimes the genre too.
Is that something where you're writing out the draft and you get the story out and then you go back later and try to sharpen the characters' voices, or when you're in the act of writing the draft for the first time, you're trying to make those voices unique?
Oh, the first go through for me is to get the action down, the place, the people, to get the story rolling, and really pretty much to get to from beginning to end, and then go back the first rewrite. You work on the characters, you try to flesh them out, give them more interesting things to do, more interesting personalities, even their language, the way they speak. You try to differentiate between one character speaking and another's. And then the third time I go through it, the second rewrite, it's descriptions,
Mm.
character descriptions, the physical location, the physical characters, and that sort of thing. I try to get those down and where they seem real.
So the first draft is kind of like bare bones story. Second
Right,
draft, you're trying to make flesh the characters out and develop them more. And the third, you're kind of looking at the on a prose level to make sure you have enough setting description, action description, in
right,
monologue. Make sure there's a balance in the kinds of sentences.
right.
I like that. I like that a lot.
I think the last one is really the hardest because
Yeah.
there is so much nowadays of wanting to read through the story. It's got to be quick, it's got to be fast. And any lengthy description of people or location quite often is either just skimmed through or
Mm-hmm.
lost. But you need to know where a person is and where this is all happening, because sometimes that can make a lot of difference in understanding why certain things happen.
Right.
And that to me is sometimes the most difficult because you're trying to be as brief and effective as you can be and keep people reading and not slow them down. That's kind of hard sometimes.
Right. So you're kind of torn between, on the one hand, you want to be short and concise and to the point, so it has a quick pace, particularly as a horror writer. But at the same time, you want to have all those sensory details. And you want to have the description
Right.
that really connects with the reader's imagination. And that might need more details, more explanation, and stuff that you might forget to add in the first time. How do you know when something's missing? Like when description's missing, visual description is missing, or a sensory detail is missing, or more dialogue is needed? How can you tell when something's missing?
A lot of times it's the flow of the story. You read
Mhm.
through it. Usually, and I think most writers do this, you set aside a story and let it sit for a while. Then you come back to it and it's fresher, it's newer to you. You don't remember maybe some of the details you wrote. And then you read through it again. And then I still do writers group and I have beta readers and that sort of thing, because once I get the story in my head and get all those details, sometimes it's a little more difficult for me to see what may be missing or how I screwed up something that isn't quite right. And I have people who will bluntly tell me, "Yeah, this doesn't work," or "You need to change this."
Okay, so you've kind of got a couple steps to that process. One is you're putting the manuscript aside and you're reading it later, and you've got some, at least somewhat fresh eyes when you're reading it, and you're like, oh,
Right,
I can see where this part is fleshed out, but this part is missing. And the other piece you have is you've got writers groups, you've got beta readers, you've got outside readers who can read it and let you know if something's unclear.
right. And there, these people have read my writing before. They know how I write and how I tell a story and that sort of thing. So that helps too. You need to have people who are interested in your work and who know it, not intimately maybe, but who have read it enough to know that you this isn't where you were. This is where you messed up.
Yeah. Or this is where I love it when you normally have an action scene, or I love it when you normally have a character with a dialect or a twist, and for some reason this story is missing that.
Right.
And maybe the average reader picking up your book might not know that, but someone who really knows you and the way you write, they might sense that and they might be able to suggest it.
Right.
All right, well, we've got some fans. We've got Jim watching and Luke and Dean. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and throw them in chat. Questions for Cary? One question we had already from Luke was, how long have you been writing?
Writing seriously for about 35 years.
That is awesome. And how has your writing changed over the years?
It's gotten a little bit more sophisticated. I read some of my older stuff, and a lot of it seems in some ways a little bit tentative. You can tell the first novel from the latest one. It's not quite as smooth and well done. I think my writing has improved, but I'm still, every time I write something, I'm trying to improve and keep it fresh and not get into this thing where, okay, I know this is Cary's writing because she does this. It's that can get boring, I think, for readers.
And then how do you keep on pushing yourself further as a writer and developing yourself and pushing your story for it further?
It's hard, and I'm retired, and I decided when I retired I was going to write full time. And there are days when it's difficult because the words aren't coming or there's a distraction. I mean, life is always distracting you one way or another. And I go to the same place to write. I write at a coffee shop here in Edmond, and I start in the same way. I look at things on the computer, my email, the Facebook. I get focused into the computer. Things are still going on around me, and I need that for whatever reason. I can't write in complete silence. Never have been able to. And you get into that, and you start rereading what you did the day before, and suddenly it's starting to flow, and the next words are coming, and the next scene is coming, and that sort of thing. It's always worked for me, just about always, to just read over what I had before, and it just starts, and you just start carrying on. It's an amazing thing. I've had other writers tell me they do the same thing, and some don't do it that way. Every writer has their own unique way of getting into it. And I write every day except the weekends. I write every morning.
So you've built a habit.
Right. It is a habit.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that if you didn't do it, that your day wouldn't seem complete, kind of thing.
Yeah. Then I think that's part of what makes you a writer, is that this is part of who you are as a person. This is part of what you're doing with your day. And even if, of course we want to write to be able to pay the bills, but it sounds like you're kind of writing because it's what you have to do.
It is. I think of someone who's been writing for a long time and someone who really enjoys it and someone who is a dedicated writer feels that they have to do it. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, you wake up and you've got an idea and you run into the computer and turn it on. I've known many writers who've done that. I've done that. It's always working. Something's always working in the back of your mind. And these ideas seem to come out of nowhere. And yet it's because you've planted that seed and it's grown and your mind is still working on it, even when you're not consciously thinking about it.
It's still going like that. Well, a hamster in the track is kind of the obvious metaphor, but it's creating something. It's like a garden. It's like flowers kind of blooming, but it's your story that's blooming.
Yeah, and you don't have to watch it every moment. That's, flowers grow whether we watch them or not. And I think your metaphor is very good in that your story grows even though you're not working on it right that moment. There is something going on in your mind, the back of your mind. Something will remind you. I've taken walks, and suddenly in the middle of a walk, an idea comes to me. And it's very frustrating not to have something where you can write it down, which can happen.
Do you ever lose ideas?
Oh yeah. Oh, someone put on Facebook, a friend of mine, that they can always write this beautiful scene while they're in the shower, and then when they come out and they try to get it down on paper, it just doesn't go. You
No.
lose it. Yeah, sometimes you have to get it down right then.
Have you ever lost a manuscript, like your computer shut down or something like that?
Not a whole manuscript or anything. I always have bunches of backups,
Good.
and I even have more now, because I have something where I can do it on the cloud, and I have another backup system. I have a remote hard drive. I've had too many people talk about losing a whole manuscript, and it just is terrifying.
Yeah, well, you're also an ex-archivist, so you know the value of copies and backups and keeping all that records.
Oh yeah, it gets to be a real habit when you're an archivist, because you know if you lost something that is original, it's gone forever. You cannot reproduce that.
Right, and humanity's lessened by the loss of that.
It can be, yeah, depending.
We had another question. What made her choose horror, and does she write anything else?
Well, I write science fiction, fantasy, horror, mysteries. I've done a lot of articles when I was a not on tenure track professor at New Mexico State, and I had to write a lot of scholarly articles for tenure. I write some poetry. Some of it's kind of mainstream, some of it's horror. And why did I pick horror? Because those are the ideas that come to me for short stories generally. I've never written a horror novel, but the short story ideas so often are horror. And I'm not exactly sure why, but they're always talking about how you're trying to get your worst fears out and that sort of thing. I don't know if that's true. I just get these ideas and say, what if, and then it just comes.
What kind of ideas? Can you give me examples?
Well, my stories generally are idea driven. So, like the spider story I was telling you about, the idea came to me from a painting that showed a woman with a glassy-eyed stare, as if she's in a trance or under drug influence or something like that. And she has on this lacy dress, and there's a spider that's dropped down to her shoulder, where there's a hole in the dress, and the spider is filling in the hole in her dress. And that's where the whole idea for that story came from. And other things, a comedian said something. One time I went to a comic performance. I've forgotten exactly what the comedy club, that's what it was. And he said something, and I immediately wrote down what he said and went home and wrote this horrific story. And
Wow.
it's even some of the horror editors were really blown away by it, just because it was so horrible, not because it was well written or anything, but because the idea was just so horrible. It was actually do-it-yourself liposuction. So,
which story was that?
It's called Seeking Perfection, and it's it's about a former model who's gained weight and lost her looks and everything, and she's trying to get it all back. So she tries do-it-yourself liposuction and this sort of thing. It gives a lot of people some nightmares.
Wow, that sounds kind of Black Mirror-ish.
It was very black and dark. That's probably the darkest idea I've ever come up with.
What gave you the idea for Threat?
How did that one start? I really thought about a woman who was on her own and trying to escape her past more than anything else. I mean, that's kind of a common theme, but the idea of being really alone. I mean, if you're on an asteroid at the edge of the solar system, that sort of thing, you can't be much more alone than that. And then to suddenly realize that you're not alone, and your past will always catch up with you eventually.
Yeah, that was good. That opening moment in the opening scene is where she has that realization.
Right.
Starts to see signs.
Uh-huh.
she's not alone. And I was creeped out. It was good. Well
Oh,
done.
good. I'm glad. Hi.
All right. Any final questions from the chat? I saw a question about ice cream. There might be some ice cream involved. I don't know. What's up, Silent Wolf? Good to see you. And Josh Hayes, Scream Overlord boss of Doom, is also here today. Jay says, nope, coffee while writing, not ice cream. And listening to this interview because I go under Lauren's interrogation lamp on Monday. Yes.
Good luck.
Him. He is also in the anthology. You guys are anthology brother and sisters together.
Wonderful.
In farthest reach.
Hi there.
All right. Any last messages to the authors and to the readers out there about
Well,
writing?
congratulations. Getting into any anthology nowadays is difficult. Short stories are not the most popular form of reading, and there's still a lot of writers who love to do them. And finding a place to have your stories go is quite an accomplishment.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your story and
Thank you.
your tips about writing. And I'm so happy to meet you for the first time. I love your adorable glasses.
Oh, thank you. My other pair's in the shop, so I always have two pairs just in case.
Yeah, that's smart. Now, where can readers find you and your work?
I'm all over the internet, of course, all the usual places. My novels are available from Crossroad Press, and those are also on Amazon and all the other usual suspects in ebook and print book. The prints are, of course, all softbound. Science fiction, fantasy, horror, those are my genres.
Awesome. Okay, so you can find her on Amazon, Cary G. Osborne, and find us on Keystroke Medium in the Facebook group.
Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate this, Lauren.
Thanks for coming on. All right, everyone has a good day, and I'll see you later.
Thank you much. Bye.